the meanest bull in Wheatland. Wyoming had killed 2 men and gored 5 others before Zelda Turner walked into the pen with nothing but a length of rope and her bare hands in the summer of 1882. Mason Keller watched from outside the fence, his heart hammering against his ribs as the massive black beast pawed at the ground, steam rising from its nostrils in the early morning air. He had seen what Diablo could do, had helped carry one of the bodies out of this very pen 3 months ago. The bull stood nearly 2,000 pounds of pure rage, bred for fighting and meaner than a rattlesnake with a headache. Every rancher within 50 miles had tried to break him, and every single one had failed or gotten hurt trying. But this woman, this slip of a thing with dark hair braided down her back and worn leather chaps over her cotton dress, she just walked right in like she was entering a church. Mason gripped the fence rail so hard his knuckles went white. He had only been working at the Triple Creek Ranch for 6 weeks, hired on after drifting up from Colorado with nothing but his horse and his saddle. He had seen plenty in his 26 years, but nothing quite like this. Zelda did not look at the bull straight on. She moved sideways, her steps slow and measured, humming something low in her throat that Mason could barely hear over the wind. Diablo snorted and tossed his massive head, those wicked horns catching the sunlight. The other ranch hands had gathered around the pen now, drawn by the commotion, and Mason heard someone mutter a prayer under their breath. "She's going to get herself killed," whispered Tom Bradley, the foreman, but he did not move to stop her. Nobody did. There was something about the way she moved, the absolute certainty in every step, that made them all hold their breath and watch. The bull charged. Mason shouted a warning, but Zelda simply stepped to the side at the last possible second, her hand trailing along the bull's flank as it thundered past. The beast wheeled around, confused now instead of enraged, and she was there again, humming that same tune, her movements fluid as water. She circled closer and closer still, until she was standing right beside that mountain of muscle and fury. Mason could not believe what he was seeing. Zelda reached up and placed her palm flat against the bull's shoulder, still humming, still moving in that strange, swaying rhythm. Diablo's ears flicked forward, his head lowered. And then, as the sun climbed higher over the Wyoming plains, the meanest bull anyone had ever seen let out a long breath and stood perfectly still, while a 23-year-old woman ran her hands over his scarred hide like he was nothing more dangerous than a milk cow. The silence that fell over the gathered cowboys was absolute. Mason felt something shift in his chest, something he had no name for. He had been drifting for so long, moving from ranch to ranch, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He had told himself he liked it that way, that he was not the settling kind. But watching this woman gentle the ungentleable, he felt an unfamiliar pull, like a compass needle swinging toward true north. Zelda stayed in that pen for the better part of an hour. By the time she finally led Diablo out on a loose rope, the bull following her like a loyal dog, Mason had made up his mind about something. He did not know what exactly, but he knew it involved getting to know the woman who could perform miracles with nothing but patience and touch. "How did you do that?" he asked when she finally emerged, latching the gate behind her. Up close, he could see the dust on her clothes, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow, and eyes the color of sage in springtime. She had a few freckles across her nose, and there was a confidence in the way she held herself that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with knowing exactly who she was. "I listened to what he was telling me," she said simply, coiling the rope in her hands. Her voice was lower than he had expected, with a slight rasp to it like whiskey and honey. "Animals are not so different from people. They act mean when they are scared or hurting. Diablo had a thorn embedded deep in his shoulder, been there for months probably, festering. I worked it out while we were getting acquainted. She held up a wicked-looking piece of wood, nearly 3 inches long. Mason stared at it, then at her, then back at the bull who was now calmly eating hay in the pen, like he had never hurt a soul in his life. "I'll be damned," Tom Bradley said, coming up beside them. "Miss Turner, you just earned every penny of what the boss is paying you and then some. That bull's worth a fortune if he can be bred now that he's not trying to kill everyone who comes near him." Zelda smiled, a quick flash of white teeth. "Just doing what I do, Mr. Bradley. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to wash up. It has been a long morning." She walked away toward the main house, leaving Mason standing there with a dozen questions on his tongue and a strange, fluttering feeling in his gut that he had not experienced since he was a green boy of 16. "Best close your mouth, Keller," Tom said with a knowing grin. "You will catch flies." Mason snapped his jaw shut, feeling heat crawl up the back of his neck. "I was just surprised is all, never seen anything like that. None of us have. Miss Turner's got a gift, that is for certain. Boss brought her in special from Cheyenne. She's staying in the guest cabin for the next 2 weeks, working with all our problem animals. We've got a horse that will not let anyone ride him, a few head of cattle that have gone wild, and now Diablo's fixed. She's worth her weight in gold. 2 weeks. Mason turned that over in his mind as he went back to his duties, mucking out stalls and mending fence line. 2 weeks to figure out what it was about Zelda Turner that had reached inside his chest and squeezed his heart like she was working out a thorn of his own. The Triple Creek Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Wyoming grassland, backed up against the foothills where the elk came down in winter. It was owned by Samuel Pritchard, a wealthy cattleman who had made his fortune during the great cattle drives of the 1870s, and now spent his time trying to breed the finest stock in the territory. He paid well, fed his men better, and generally left them alone to do their work. It was the best job Mason had held in years, and he had been thinking maybe, just maybe, he might stay on through the winter instead of drifting south like he usually did. Now that thinking had solidified into certainty, though he was not quite ready to examine why too closely. He saw Zelda again at dinner that evening. The ranch hands all ate together in the big dining hall attached to the bunkhouse, sitting at long tables and passing platters of beef, potatoes, and beans while they talked about the day's work. She came in with Samuel Pritchard, the older man treating her with the respect due a valued professional. She took a seat at the far end of the table, and Mason found himself angling for a spot where he could watch her without being too obvious about it. She ate with good appetite, laughing at something one of the other cowboys said, her whole face lighting up with genuine mirth. Mason learned she had grown up on a ranch outside Cheyenne, that her father had been a horse breaker, and her mother had died when she was young. She had learned her trade from her father and a Shoshone woman who had worked on their ranch, combining practical knowledge with something older, something that could not quite be taught from a book. "It is about reading the animal," she explained when someone asked her to describe her method. "Every creature has a language, you just have to learn how to speak it. Body position, ear placement, the way they hold their weight. A horse that is afraid will tell you with every muscle. A bull that is in pain will show you if you know what to look for. Most people just never bother to look." "What about people?" Mason heard himself asking, his voice carrying down the table. "Can you read them too?" She turned those sage green eyes on him, and he felt pinned in place like a butterfly on a board. A slow smile curved her lips. "Sometimes. People are more complicated, though. They lie, even to themselves. Animals are honest. What am I telling you right now?" The words were out before he could stop them, and he heard a few snickers from the other hands. He felt his face heat but held her gaze. Zelda tilted her head, studying him with the same intensity she had given the bull that morning. "You are telling me you are curious. You are telling me you have been moving for a long time and you are tired of it, even if you do not want to admit it yet. And you are telling me you are interested in more than just my animal handling skills." The table erupted in hoots and hollers. Mason felt his ears burn red, but he could not help the grin that split his face. "Guess you are as good with people as you are with bulls." "Better," she said, and there was a challenge in her voice that made something hot and eager coil in his belly. "Animals are easy." After dinner, he found her outside the guest cabin, sitting on the porch steps and looking up at the stars. The Wyoming sky stretched overhead like a black velvet cloth studded with diamonds, the Milky Way a river of light flowing east to west. Mason hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself in a way he had not been since he was a kid, but she patted the step beside her in invitation. "Could not sleep?" he asked, settling down with a careful foot of space between them. "I never sleep well the first few nights in a new place," she admitted. "Too many new sounds, new smells. My brain will not settle down." "I know what you mean. I have been doing that for years now, moving place to place." "You would think I would be used to it, but I am not." She looked over at him, her profile limned in starlight. "Why do you move so much?" Mason was quiet for a long moment, watching a shooting star trace its way across the heavens. "I guess I have been looking for something. I grew up on a small ranch down in southern Colorado. My pa died when I was 15, and my ma tried to keep things going, but the land was bad and the drought came and we lost everything. She remarried a few years later, moved to Denver with her new husband. He did not want me around, and truth be told, I did not want to be there either. So I have been working ranches ever since, going wherever the work is, never really landing anywhere." "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. There was something about the darkness, about her presence, that made it easy to say things he normally kept locked up tight. "But it is also safe, you know. If you do not put down roots, you cannot lose them." "You cannot grow anything either," she said softly. "Not in yourself, not with other people. Everything needs roots, Mason. Even tumbleweeds start somewhere." His name in her mouth sent a shiver down his spine. "What about you? You do not exactly stay in one place either, from what I hear." "That is different. I go where I am needed, but I always come home. My father's ranch is still there, still mine. I have roots, deep ones. I just let my branches spread wide." She paused, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. "It gets lonely sometimes too, though. Most men do not know what to make of me. I am not exactly wife material when I spend my days covered in mud and animal spit, gentling creatures that could kill me without trying." "I think you are extraordinary," Mason said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "This morning, watching you with Diablo, it was like watching magic. Like watching someone speak a language I did not know existed. And at dinner, the way you read me so easily, it should have been unsettling, but it was not. It was just honest." She turned to look at him fully, and in the starlight her eyes were dark and depthless. "You want to know what else I can read in you?" "What?" "That you are scared. Not of me, but of what I represent, the possibility of staying. The possibility of wanting something more than the next job, the next town. You have been running for so long that the idea of standing still terrifies you." Mason felt like she had reached inside his chest and pulled out his heart to examine it. "You are right," he admitted. "But you know what is even scarier? How much I want to try anyway." The silence between them hummed with potential energy. Zelda reached out and took his hand, her palm warm and calloused against his. "Then maybe we should both be brave," she whispered. He did not kiss her that night, though he wanted to. Instead, they sat on those steps until the moon rose, talking about everything and nothing, sharing pieces of themselves like trading cards. He learned that she loved thunderstorms, that she could not carry a tune to save her life despite her humming, that she had a terrible weakness for peppermint sticks and dime novels. She learned that he was handy with a guitar, that he had a scar on his shoulder from being thrown into a barbed wire fence when he was 18, that he dreamed sometimes of having land of his own, but had never let himself seriously consider it. When they finally parted ways, Mason walked back to the bunkhouse feeling lighter than he had in years, like something heavy had been lifted from his shoulders. The other hands were already snoring in their beds, but he lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about sage green eyes and the woman who could gentle the meanest bull in Wyoming. He wondered, in the quiet darkness of his own heart, what she could do with him. The next day, Zelda started working with Hellfire, a beautiful bay stallion with a white blaze and a temperament to match his name. He had thrown every rider who had tried to mount him, and Samuel Pritchard was about ready to sell him off before he killed someone. Mason volunteered to help, claiming he had some experience with difficult horses, but really he just wanted to be near her, to watch her work her magic again. They spent the morning in the round pen, with Mason standing outside while Zelda worked inside with the stallion. Hellfire snorted and pranced, showing off his considerable strength and speed, but Zelda did not try to dominate him or break his spirit. Instead, she mirrored his movements, trotting when he trotted, stopping when he stopped, always keeping her body turned slightly away to show she was not a threat. "You are letting him think it is his idea," Mason observed, fascinated. "Exactly," she called back. "If I try to force him, he will fight me forever. But if I make him curious, if I make him want to come to me, then we can work together instead of against each other." It took 3 hours, but eventually Hellfire walked right up to Zelda and lowered his head, blowing softly into her hair. She stroked his neck, praising him in that low, warm voice, and Mason felt his throat tighten with an emotion he could not name. There was something so purely good about what she did, so fundamentally kind, that it made him want to be a better man. They broke for lunch, eating sandwiches under the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek that gave the ranch its name. The water burbled over smooth stones and dragonflies darted through the dappled sunlight. "Can I ask you something?" Zelda said, wiping her hands on her handkerchief. "Anything. What would you do if you could do anything? If money and land and all of that were not an issue, what would make you happy?" Mason thought about it, really thought about it, maybe for the first time in his life. "I would want a small ranch," he said slowly. "Nothing huge, just enough land for some horses and cattle. A good house with a porch for sitting in the evenings, maybe a dog or two, and I would want to work with my hands building something that lasts, something I could be proud of." He paused, feeling vulnerable, "and I would want someone to share it with. Someone who understood that kind of life, who wanted it too." "That does not sound so impossible," Zelda said softly. "It does when you have got exactly $73 to your name and no prospects for more. Money can be earned. Land can be bought or homesteaded. The hard part is knowing what you want and being willing to work for it." She looked at him with those knowing eyes. "The question is, are you willing?" Before he could answer, Tom Bradley came jogging up, his face flushed. "Miss Turner, Mr. Keller, you need to come quick. We have got a situation with the wild cattle in the north pasture. They have broken through the fence and are heading toward the Johnsons' property. If they get into the wheat fields, it will be a disaster." They both jumped up, lunch forgotten. The next few hours were a blur of hard riding and harder work. The wild cattle, 5 steers that had escaped a roundup months ago and gone feral in the backcountry were ornery and unpredictable. They had already trampled a section of fence and were heading straight for the neighbor's valuable wheat crop. Mason rode hard alongside Zelda and a half-dozen other ranch hands, trying to turn the steers back toward Triple Creek land. But every time they got close, the cattle would scatter and regroup, their eyes rolling white with fear and aggression. One of them, a massive longhorn with 6 feet of horn span, turned and charged Mason's horse. His gelding, Smoky, reared up in alarm, and Mason felt himself slipping from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked clean out of his lungs. The longhorn was coming right at him, head lowered, those wicked horns aimed straight for his chest. Mason scrambled backward, knowing he could not move fast enough, knowing this was how it ended. And then Zelda was there, throwing herself between Mason and the charging steer, her arms spread wide and that humming sound rising from her throat. The longhorn skidded to a stop not 5 feet from them, confused by this small human who showed no fear. Zelda did not move, did not even flinch, just stood there humming that strange tune and staring the animal down. Time seemed to stretch and bend. Mason could hear his heart pounding in his ears, could feel the Wyoming dust in his mouth. The longhorn pawed the ground once, twice, and then turned and trotted away, heading back toward the other steers who were already being herded back through the broken fence by the other cowboys. Zelda turned to Mason, her face pale but composed. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, still trying to catch his breath. "You saved my life. You would have done the same for me. I do not know if I could have been that brave." She helped him to his feet, her hands strong and sure. "Bravery is not about not being scared, Mason. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified. I was scared out of my mind just now. You did not show it. Because that steer needed to believe I was not a threat. If I had shown fear, he would have charged right through me to get to you." She brushed the dust off his shirt, her touch lingering. "I could not let that happen." Their eyes met, and Mason saw his own feelings reflected back at him. This was more than attraction, more than simple wanting. This was the kind of connection that poets wrote about and cowboys dreamed of during long nights on the trail. This was the kind of thing that changed lives. "Zelda," he started, but she put a finger to his lips. "Not yet," she whispered. "Ask me when I am done here, when I am not covered in dust and adrenaline. Ask me when you have had time to think about what you really want." "I already know what I want," he said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her dusty knuckles. "But I will wait if that is what you need." They rode back to the ranch in a companionable silence, something unspoken but understood passing between them. That evening, Mason sat on his bunk and counted his money again. $73. It was not much, but it was a start. If he saved his wages, if he worked hard and maybe picked up some extra jobs in town, he could have a real stake in a year or two. He could file a homestead claim on government land, build a cabin, start a small herd. For the first time in his adult life, Mason Keller let himself plan for a future that extended beyond the next season. The days fell into a rhythm. Mason worked his regular ranch duties during the early morning and late afternoon, but he spent every spare moment helping Zelda with the problem animals. She taught him how to read the subtle signs of stress and fear, how to move in ways that communicated calm and safety. He was not a natural like she was, but he learned, and he got better. Hellfire was fully gentled by the end of the week, accepting a saddle and rider without protest. The wild cattle were brought in and settled. Zelda moved on to working with a milk cow that kicked anyone who tried to touch her udder, discovering a painful infection that had gone untreated. Once the cow was healed, she became docile as a lamb. And every evening, Mason and Zelda sat on the porch steps of the guest cabin and talked until the stars came out. He learned that she wanted children someday, a whole houseful of them running wild on a ranch. She learned that he could play the fiddle as well as the guitar, that his mother had been part Lakota and he had her dark hair and high cheekbones. They shared their fears and hopes, their dreams and disappointments. Peeling back the layers, they showed the world to reveal the tender truth underneath. On her 12th night at the ranch, Mason finally kissed her. They had been talking about nothing in particular, and she had laughed at something he said, her whole face alight with joy. He had not planned it, had not thought about it, he just leaned over and pressed his lips to hers. She tasted like coffee and something sweet, and when she kissed him back, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she touched her forehead to his. "I have been waiting for you to do that. I have been wanting to since the moment I saw you walk into that pen with Diablo. What took you so long? I wanted to be sure. I wanted to make sure this was not just some passing fancy, that I was not just caught up in the moment." He cupped her face in his hands, rough calluses against soft skin. "Zelda, I am not good at pretty words, but I need you to know something. I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling the second I saw you gentle that bull, and I have not stopped since. You make me want to be better, to do better, to build something that lasts." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I love you too, Mason Keller. I think I knew it that first night when we sat out here under the stars. You are kind and honest and brave in ways you do not even recognize. You have been running for so long, but I want to be the reason you stop." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it, and when they finally pulled apart, Mason felt like his chest might burst with the enormity of what he was feeling. This was it. This was what he had been searching for all those years on the drift. Not a place, but a person. Not a destination, but a companion for the journey. "I do not have much," he said, needing her to understand. "I've got $73, a horse, and a saddle. But I will work every day for the rest of my life to give you the life you deserve. We can homestead land, build a ranch of our own. It will be hard work, and we will probably be poor for a while, but I promise you I will never stop trying." Zelda laughed, bright and clear in the darkness. "Mason, I do not need much. I need a partner who will work beside me, who will respect what I do and encourage me to keep doing it. I need someone who will sit with me on the porch and look at the stars. I need you. Everything else we can figure out together. Is that a yes?" "That is absolutely a yes." They stayed up until dawn making plans. Zelda had saved a good portion of her earnings over the years, nearly $400 that she had been keeping for an emergency or opportunity. Combined with Mason's savings and what they could both earn over the next year, they would have enough to file a homestead claim and buy the supplies needed to start their own ranch. Zelda would continue taking on animal training jobs, traveling when necessary, but always coming home. Mason would work the land and build up their herd, using the skills he had learned over years of ranch work. It was not going to be easy. Homesteading never was. But for the first time in his life, Mason was not daunted by the hard work ahead. With Zelda by his side, he felt like he could do anything. Her 2 weeks at the Triple Creek Ranch came to an end on a Tuesday morning. Samuel Pritchard paid her the agreed-upon fee plus a generous bonus, praising her work and asking her to come back anytime she was needed. Zelda promised she would, then went to pack her things. Mason helped her load her wagon, his heart heavy despite the joy he felt about their future. She was heading back to Cheyenne to check on her father's ranch and settle some business. He would finish out the season at Triple Creek, saving every penny he could, and then he would meet her in December. They would spend the winter planning and saving, and in the spring, They would file their homestead claim and start building their dream. 3 months, she said, standing beside her wagon with the morning sun turning her hair to burnished bronze. It seems like forever. It will go fast, he said, though he did not believe it, and then we will have the rest of our lives. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. I love you, Mason Keller. I love you too, Zelda Turner. Soon to be Zelda Keller if you will have me proper. I will have you any way I can get you, she whispered against his neck, and then she was climbing up onto the wagon seat and taking up the reins. He stood in the dust and watched her drive away, one hand raised in farewell, his heart already counting the days until he would see her again. The next 3 months were the longest of Mason's life. He threw himself into his work with single-minded determination, taking on every extra job and task he could find. He mended fence until his hands bled, worked roundups until he could barely stand, and volunteered for the night watches that no one else wanted. Tom Bradley noticed and asked him about it one evening. You are working yourself to death, Keller. What is driving you? I am saving up to start my own place, Mason admitted. Going to file a homestead claim come spring. Tom whistled low. That is ambitious. You have got a woman involved in this plan. Mason could not help the grin that split his face. The best woman you ever met. Miss Turner, the same. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Well, I will be damned. Good for you, son. She is something special, that one. You treat her right. I plan to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that. The letters helped. Zelda wrote to him every week, long, rambling letters full of news about her father's ranch, the animals she was working with, and her plans for their future. She had found a piece of land she thought might be perfect for them, 160 acres with a creek running through it and good grass for grazing. It was about 20 miles south of Cheyenne, close enough to town for supplies but far enough out to have real privacy. Mason wrote back, his letters shorter and clumsier than hers but no less heartfelt. He told her about his days, about the money he was saving, about the dreams he had for their ranch. He told her he loved her in every letter, sometimes multiple times, never tiring of putting the words on paper. October turned to November, and the weather started to turn cold. The cattle were brought down from the high pastures, and the ranch settled into its winter routine. Mason gave his notice to Samuel Pritchard, thanking him for the steady work and good pay. The older man shook his hand and wished him luck, telling him there would always be a job waiting if things did not work out. But Mason knew they would work out. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. He left the Triple Creek Ranch on the 1st of December with his horse, his saddle, a bedroll, and $218 carefully sewn into the lining of his coat. It was more money than he had ever had at one time, and the weight of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. He rode south toward Cheyenne, his heart light despite the bitter wind, knowing that Zelda was waiting for him. He arrived in Cheyenne 4 days later, half frozen and covered in road dust. The Turner Ranch was easy to find, a neat spread just outside the city limits with a well-maintained house and barn. Mason rode up the drive with his heart in his throat, and before he could even dismount, the front door flew open and Zelda came running out. She launched herself at him, and he caught her, lifting her clear off the ground and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You are here. You are really here," she kept saying, and he could only hold her tighter and nod because his throat was too full of emotion for words. Her father, James Turner, was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He invited Mason in for supper, and they sat around the warm kitchen table eating stew and fresh bread while Zelda chattered about their plans. James listened, asked smart questions, and finally nodded his approval. "You have got a hard row to hoe ahead of you," he said to Mason. "Homesteading is not for the weak or the lazy. You will work harder than you have ever worked in your life, and there will be times when you want to quit. But if you have got the grit to stick it out, you can build something real, something that will last." "I've got the grit, sir," Mason said. "And I've got your daughter, which means I can handle anything," James smiled. "You will do, son. You will do just fine." Mason stayed in the guest room that night, propriety observed despite everything. But the next morning, he and Zelda rode out to look at the land she had found. It was everything she had described and more. The creek was clear and cold, running year-round according to the locals. The grass was good, and there was a stand of cottonwood trees that would provide shade in summer and windbreak in winter. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles east, and the road to Cheyenne was well maintained. "What do you think?" Zelda asked, her voice soft with hope. Mason dismounted and walked to the creek, kneeling down to scoop up a handful of water. He drank, the cold shocking against his tongue, and felt something settle deep in his bones. This was it. This was home. "I think it is perfect," he said, and watched joy bloom across her face like sunrise. They filed the homestead claim the next day, signing the papers that gave them rights to the land provided they lived on it and improved it within 5 years. It was December 10th, 1882, and it was the first day of their real life together. But first, they got married. They held the ceremony in the small church in Cheyenne on a cold Saturday afternoon with James Turner and a few of Zelda's friends as witnesses. Zelda wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Mason wore his best clothes, freshly cleaned and pressed. The ceremony was short and sweet, the reverend speaking about commitment and faith and the sacred bond of marriage. When Mason kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They spent their wedding night at a hotel in town, a luxury they could barely afford but would not have missed for the world. Mason had been with women before, quick tumbles that meant nothing and were forgotten by morning. But this was different. This was Zelda, his wife, the woman he loved more than life itself. They came together slowly, gently, learning each other's bodies with reverent touches and whispered words. It was beautiful and awkward and perfect, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Mason felt complete in a way he never had before. They moved onto the land after Christmas, living in a canvas tent while they started building their cabin. It was brutal work in the winter cold, but they labored side by side, felling trees and hauling stones for the foundation. James came out to help when he could, teaching Mason the finer points of construction. By February, they had 4 walls and a roof, and they spent their first night in their own home wrapped in blankets on the dirt floor, watching the fire crackle in the stone hearth they had built together. "We did it," Zelda whispered, her head on Mason's chest. "We really did it." "We did," he agreed, stroking her hair. "And we are just getting started." Spring came, and with it the real work began. They planted a garden, built a barn and corral, and bought their first cattle, 10 head that Mason planned to build into a herd. Zelda put the word out that she was available for animal training work, and the jobs started coming in. She was gone sometimes for a week at a time, traveling to nearby ranches to work with difficult horses and cattle. Mason hated when she was away, but he understood that her work was important to her, and he would never ask her to give it up. Besides, the money she earned was crucial. Homesteading was expensive, and there were always more supplies needed, more improvements to be made. They lived frugally, eating beans and salt pork more often than not, wearing clothes until they fell apart and then patching them. But they were building something, brick by brick and board by board, and that made every sacrifice worthwhile. In May, Zelda came home from a job and promptly threw up in the bushes beside the house. Mason rushed to her side, alarmed, but she just laughed and wiped her mouth. "I am not sick," she said, her eyes shining. "I am pregnant." Mason felt like he had been hit by lightning. "A baby. We are having a baby. We are having a baby." He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, and she laughed and held onto his shoulders and kissed him until they were both breathless. They were going to be parents. They were going to have a family. The thought filled Mason with a fierce protectiveness and pride he had never experienced before. Zelda continued working through the summer, though she took fewer jobs and stayed closer to home. Her belly grew round with their child, and Mason found himself constantly marveling at the miracle of it. He would lay his hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick. An emotion would well up in him so strongly he could barely breathe. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1884, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Jacob after Mason's father, and Mason held him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. This tiny, perfect person was his and Zelda's, a living embodiment of their love. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He has your eyes," Zelda said, exhausted but radiant. "And your stubborn chin," she laughed weakly. "Poor thing." Those first months with Jacob were hard. He cried constantly, and neither of them got much sleep. But there were moments of pure magic, too. The first time he smiled, the way he would grip Mason's finger with his tiny hand, the soft weight of him sleeping on Mason's chest. Zelda proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when she was dead on her feet. Mason fell even more deeply in love with his wife, if that was possible. She was so strong, so capable, handling a screaming infant and a house, and still taking the occasional training job when James could come stay with the baby. She was everything he had ever wanted and more. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Their herd grew slowly but steadily. Mason proved to have a good eye for cattle, breeding healthy calves that sold well at market. The cabin was expanded, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. The garden flourished under Zelda's care, providing vegetables through the summer and canned goods for winter. Jacob grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his parents everywhere, trying to help with every task. When he was 3, Zelda announced she was pregnant again, and this time their daughter was born on a warm summer evening with fireflies dancing outside the window. They named her Lily, and she had Zelda's green eyes and a sweet, calm disposition that was a relief after Jacob's endless energy. Zelda continued her animal training work, taking Lily with her when she was nursing and leaving her with Mason or James when she was older. She built a reputation as the best in the territory, and people would travel from hundreds of miles away to hire her services. The money she brought in allowed them to buy more land, more cattle, to really build the ranch into something substantial. When Mason looked back on those years, they seemed to shimmer like a dream. There were hard times, of course. The winter of 1886 was brutal, and they lost a quarter of their herd to the cold. Jacob broke his arm falling from a tree when he was 6, and Mason had never been more scared in his life. There were arguments, moments of frustration and exhaustion when they snapped at each other and had to remember to be kind. But there was so much more good than bad. There were summer evenings sitting on the porch they had finally built, watching the sun set over land they owned. There were Christmas mornings with the children's laughter ringing through the house. There were quiet nights when the kids were asleep, and he and Zelda would sit by the fire, her feet in his lap while he rubbed them, and she told him about her day. There were moments when he would watch her work with a difficult horse, that same patient gentleness, she had shown Diablo all those years ago, and he would remember the first time he saw her. The woman who could gentle the meanest bull. He had wondered back then what she could do with him. Now he knew. She had gentled all the wild, wandering parts of him, had given him roots and purpose and a reason to stay. When Jacob was 10 and Lily was 7, Zelda came home from a job with a young bull in tow. Found him at the Hendersons' place, she explained. They were going to shoot him because he is too aggressive to handle. But I saw something in him, Mason. He reminds me of Diablo. The bull was indeed mean, all muscle and fury, but Zelda worked with him patiently over the course of several months. She taught Jacob and Lily how to read animals the way she did, passing on the knowledge that had been given to her. The children took to it naturally, especially Lily, who seemed to have inherited her mother's gift in full measure. By the time the bull was fully gentled, they had decided to keep him for breeding. He sired strong calves with good temperaments, and the Keller Ranch became known for quality cattle as well as Zelda's training abilities. More years passed. Jacob grew tall and strong like his father, with the same dark hair and quiet competence. Lily grew into a beauty with her mother's green eyes and gentle way with creatures. Mason and Zelda grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. There was a third child, another son they named Thomas, born when Lily was 5. And a fourth, a daughter named Ruth, who came as a surprise when Zelda thought she was done having babies. The house was full of noise and life, and Mason could not imagine it any other way. On a warm evening in the summer of 1899, Mason sat on his porch watching the sunset. He was 43 years old now, his dark hair shot through with silver, his hands scarred and work-worn. Beside him, Zelda was still beautiful, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes and strength in every line of her body. Their children were scattered across the property. Jacob, now 17, was working with the cattle in the far pasture. Lily, 14, was in the barn gentling a new horse. Thomas, 10, was supposed to be doing his chores but was probably fishing in the creek. Ruth, 7, was in the house helping with dinner. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked, taking Zelda's hand. "All this hard work, all these years of struggle." She looked at him like he had grown a second head. "Regret you. Regret our children, our home, our life. Mason Keller, you are a damn fool if you think I have a single regret," he grinned. "Just checking. What about you? You gave up the drifting life, settled down with a woman who spends half her time covered in mud and animal hair. Any regrets?" He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Not a single one. You know what I was thinking about earlier? That first day I saw you with Diablo, I thought you were the bravest thing I had ever seen, and I wondered what a woman who could gentle the meanest bull could do with me. And what is the verdict? You made me the best version of myself. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to put down roots. You gentled all the wild, scared parts of me and made me believe I deserved good things." He turned her face toward him. "I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I did not think that was possible." She smiled, that same beautiful smile that had captured his heart 17 years ago. "I love you too, Cowboy, now and always." They sat there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Their children's voices drifted to them on the evening breeze, and the cattle lowed softly in the distance. The land they had built together spread out in all directions, solid and real and theirs. Jacob eventually took over the main operation of the ranch, proving to have his father's head for business and his mother's way with animals. He married a schoolteacher from Cheyenne when he was 22, and they gave Mason and Zelda their first grandchildren. Lily followed in her mother's footsteps completely, becoming an animal trainer of even greater renown, traveling as far as Montana and Colorado for her work. Thomas became a veterinarian, one of the first in the territory, combining modern medicine with the traditional knowledge his mother taught him. Ruth married a lawyer and moved to Denver, but she came home often, never losing her love for the ranch where she had grown up. Mason and Zelda grew old together on the land they had claimed. They buried James Turner when he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, and they grieved together and kept going. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and the births of grandchildren. They worked the land until their bodies would not let them anymore, and then they sat on the porch and watched their children and grandchildren carry on what they had started. On a crisp October morning in 1918, Mason woke to find Zelda still sleeping beside him. The morning light slanted through the bedroom window, illuminating her face. She was 70 now, her hair completely white, her face deeply lined. But to Mason, she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Good morning," she murmured, opening her eyes. "Good morning, my love." "How long have you been awake?" "A while. I was just looking at you, thinking about how lucky I have been." She reached out and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "We have had a good life, have we not? The best life. Do you remember that first night, sitting on the porch steps at Triple Creek? You told me you were falling in love with me. I remember everything about you, about us. Every moment is burned into my heart. I knew that night I was going to marry you. I knew you were the one I had been waiting for. The cowboy who needed gentling," she laughed, the sound still as bright and clear as it had been when she was 23. The cowboy who needed to stop running long enough to realize he was already home. They spent that day together, just the two of them, walking slowly around the ranch and remembering. They visited the spot where the first tent had stood, where the original cabin walls had been raised. They sat by the creek where Mason had knelt and drunk the water, and known this was where he belonged. They stood in the barn where so many animals had been gentled and healed. As the sun began to set, they climbed back up to the porch, settling into the rocking chairs that Jacob had made for their 50th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren were coming for Sunday dinner the next day, and the house would be full of noise and chaos and love. But for now it was just the two of them, just like it had been at the beginning. "Mason," Zelda said softly. "Yes, love, thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to stay, for choosing me, for choosing this life, for giving me 55 years of happiness." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many decades of practice. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth gentling. Thank you for showing me what it means to have a home." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. The same stars they had watched that first night in Wheatland, Wyoming. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every joy and sorrow of their long life together. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A coyote called to its mate. The creek burbled over stones worn smooth by time. And on the porch of the house they had built with their own hands, Mason and Zelda Keller rocked gently, their love as constant and enduring as the land itself. Years later, their great-grandchildren would tell the story of how it all started. How Zelda Turner had walked into a pen with the meanest bull in Wyoming and gentled him with nothing but patience and understanding. How Mason Keller had watched and wondered what such a woman could do with a drifting cowboy who had forgotten how to stay still. How two people had found each other and built something beautiful and lasting in the wild Wyoming landscape. They would tell the story of first meetings and patient courtship, of hard winters and harder work, of children raised and land claimed, and a love that never wavered. They would tell it around campfires and dinner tables, passing it down like a precious heirloom, keeping the memory alive. But the best part of the story, the part that mattered most, was not the dramatic moments or the sweeping gestures. It was the quiet daily choice to love and be loved. It was the thousands of small kindnesses, the shared glances across a crowded room, the comfort of a familiar hand in the darkness. It was the way Mason still brought Zelda flowers from the meadow every spring, even when his joints ached and walking was hard. It was the way Zelda still looked at him like he had hung the moon, even after 55 years of marriage. It was the proof that love, real love, was not about grand passion that burned hot and fast. It was about steady warmth that lasted through decades, providing light and heat through every season. It was about choosing each other, again and again, every single day. The Keller Ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people can build when they commit to each other and to the land. The creek still runs clear and cold. The grass still grows thick and green. And if you sit quietly on the porch in the evening, when the light is just right and the wind is blowing from the west, you can almost hear the echo of laughter and love that's soaked into the very boards of that house. You can almost see a young woman walking fearlessly into a pen with a dangerous bull, humming under her breath. You can almost see a cowboy watching her with wonder in his eyes, his heart already knowing what his mind had not yet realized. You can almost feel the magic of that first meeting, when two souls recognized each other across the space between them and decided, against all odds and obstacles, to build a life together. That is the story of Mason and Zelda Keller. That is the legacy they left behind. Not just land and cattle and a successful ranch, but proof that love, courage, and commitment can create something that outlasts any individual life. They showed everyone who came after them that home is not a place you find, but something you build with the person you love, one day and one choice at a time. And in the end, that is the greatest gift of all.